Good afternoon. As Mr. Ted said, my name's Tedrick Ratcliffe. I was last year's Mississippi Farm Bureau Federation Discussion Meet winner. Today I will serve as the moderator for our meet this afternoon. This afternoon's topic for our contestants will be, the nation's tax policy has become increasingly complicated and cumbersome. What should a balanced and beneficial tax policy look like for agriculture? Serving as our timekeeper today will be Mrs. Kayla Poe, who is a member of the State Young Farmer and Ranchers Leadership Committee. This time I would like to introduce this afternoon's contestants. We will have Jesse Morrison, Laura Greenhall, Strider McRory, and Emma Jumper. Contestants, if you'd make your way to the front at this time. Farm Bureau's strength depends on its members' ability to analyze agriculture problems and decide on a solution that best meets their needs. The discussion meet is designed to simulate a committee meeting where discussion and active participation are expected from each of the committee members. By participating, members build basic discussion skills, develop a keen understanding of important ag issues, as well as explore how groups can pool knowledge to reach a consensus and solve problems. Contestants, in voluntary order, please make your 30-second opening statements.
What a topic to choose as the capstone of this afternoon's discussions. Ladies and gentlemen, I would submit to you that taxes are a lot like the game of golf. We all work so hard to get in the green and then wind up in a hole. Well, to bring about tax reform for America's agriculturalists, I would submit to you that it's a triune. It not only comes from tax reform for the farmer, the one that produces the goods, it comes with tax reform for the consumer, the one that keeps us in business, and finally, for the corporation that provides us with the technology. I'm excited to discuss these things and others with my peers today.
Give me the rules and I'll play the game. Many provisions are put in place for those of us in agriculture. Since agriculture is so unique in and of itself, these rules are there so that we can operate under the parameters of these laws as they exist currently.
Complicated tax code, which leads to complicated tax returns, leads to complications in benefits and penalties. These are all difficult things everyone has to deal with. These are especially complicated to deal with when your main source of income is unstable and its temporal fluctuations can be wild. I believe a balanced and beneficial tax code should include all agricultural producers, and it should stimulate savings for producers and should award true entrepreneurship.
Tax policy in the United States is complicated at best. I believe this is in an effort to take into account the many variables that should be considered when thinking about how individuals and businesses should contribute to the common public interest. There is value in fairness, there is value in simplicity. I look forward to discussing with my peers this afternoon the problems that might exist in our current tax policy and what a balanced and beneficial tax policy should look like for agriculture.
We will now start a 30-minute discussion of the topic.
I really liked what you said earlier in your opening statement about a savings stimulus to be incorporated into this tax reformation. Can you share with us a little bit more about that, or expand on what needs to change in order to promote this savings ideology around farming?
Sure. So I mean, one of the most basic hurdles that farmers, producers, cattlemen, cattlewomen, whoever you're talking about, have to deal with is the sporadic system of their income balance. Years that are good, we often don't save enough. Years that are bad, you have no pot to go to. Sometimes you may have to go for a loan. No one ever wants to take out a loan, but we all know that agriculture in general is a game of ups and downs. There's no way around that. Having a way where producers can save money, working that into a tax code would be wonderful, but having a way where they can save money, where they can use the opportunities when they do have flushed years, would set them up much better to deal with years that are down. Right now, we don't have a tax system that will help a producer enough in an up year to make up for the down years.
Absolutely. You know, American Farm Bureau Federation has one policy they support that calls for income averaging that would take care of those years that you talk about that are extra
Sure.
lean, and also consider those years where you have the bumper crop. You know, I heard a farmer say one time that my life is told in 40 paychecks. You know, I get 40 harvests every year, and he said, usually what it is, it's lean, 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 boom, because rarely do your yields coincide with market price. But what you say is so applicable to be able to stretch out those 40 paychecks. You know, the average worker gets a paycheck every 2 weeks, at least I certainly do at the Mississippi State Dairy. And so it's different for agriculturalists, and I think our tax policy needs to do just that, to
Going
space
back
out
to
the
what
expenses.
Jesse said there, I had a much wiser older farmer tell me one time that a good year can break you faster than a bad year. So you sit back and you think about that, okay?
That's right.
And that's exactly what you're saying there, just in a much more simplistic form. But let's take a look at, what actually does exist already. I interviewed several producers in the past 10 days, and a lot of us are actually pretty satisfied with our current tax policies. We've got a great 179 deduction. Don't dare try and take that from me. We've got a 50% bonus depreciation. We've got 1.5% sales tax on a lot of our inputs, 0% on seed, which is my highest cost besides rent. So let's not paint it all to be bad. There's some great things out there. Now, what are some cons? Oh, don't stay estate tax around a large producer. I mean, that's a dirty word. You're allowed roughly $5.5 million for the husband and $5.5 million for the wife. Well, maybe not in the Mississippi Delta, but if say you're on a cattle ranch close to a ski resort in Wyoming or Montana, well, what's the value of your land? Well, it could be upwards of $200,000, $300,000 an acre for some development. I mean, how do you have to sell off part of your farm to pass it on to your kids? That's something that needs to be dealt with. What would you have to say in regards to that, Emma?
Well, so one of the things that I wanted to touch on is that stepped-up basis that the administration of 2004 allowed us to implement on farming property. So just like you said, some of that ground that is incredibly expensive, whatever it was purchased for back in 1912, whenever Grandpa originally bought the farm, it's going to be worth a lot more today. And you don't want to pay capital gains on that whenever you pass an estate from one generation to the next. So that stepped-up basis is incredibly crucial for us to maintain. Now, that's not something that's currently being debated for taking it out, but it's certainly something Farm Bureau wants to celebrate. Now, the next thing that I wanted to talk about is that you mentioned this depreciation, and one thing that Mississippi Farm Bureau pushes for is a rapid depreciating system for equipment, but we need to expand that to all types of investments, to equipment, to things that will produce long-term gains for our operation, because the sooner we get that equipment depreciated off the book, the lower our taxable income goes down.
You're hitting on one that's a major there for us, and sorry, Laura, I'm going to bring you in here, okay? Buildings, shops, machinery sheds, since they are multi-purpose, I mean, you could hold a dance under one, I guess, presumably, if you wanted one for profit. I just want to park my tractors under them to keep them out of the weather.
Sure.
But we're not able to depreciate those in the same way, so it may take me 20 years to depreciate it out, but I don't get those same terms to pay for it. So what would you have to say in response? What's a good way to kind of handle that?
So thanks for throwing me a bone here. I was trying to get in there for a second. And as I think about this question, I come back to what are the real problems? And so things like maybe estate tax, depending on where you are, and the fact that those multi-purpose buildings and articles don't get to be depreciated like we would like them to as an ag entity. what are the other problems that apply broadly? Because not everybody lives in Wyoming or Colorado right next to a ski resort, and that land value is too high. So as we talk about the actual tax policy, are there things that are truly wrong with it that can be addressed on a broad scale?
Well, you know, agricultural producers in the United States have been blessed in this last cycle with tax reform, as Strider mentioned earlier. But there's one overarching principle that I think everyone can be in agreement on, and that's that the corporations that are providing us with technology and the goods that we buy so that we can do our job are moving overseas to get away from those taxes. And so if we're looking at what is truly wrong, you have major corporations that are merging just to get outside of the United States borders so they don't have to pay our corporate taxes. So if you look at all of the things that are incorporated into agriculture's best welfare, I think we also need to go to bat for those corporations that are providing the technology that we want first here in America. We want those companies to stay here. So on a farm level, you know, that looks like us signing a check. But at the end of the day, some of those input costs that we will face deal with our counterparts too that are moving away so they can get a tax break.
So I hear what you're saying, and I'll be honest, I'm not a producer, and so I don't understand all the loopholes and all the challenges that you face when you try to understand that complex tax code, both from an individual perspective and from a business perspective. What I do know is that taxes are applied in order for the common good. And so I kind of come back to this part of the question of what is balanced and what is beneficial on both terms. Because we know that we need bridges, we know that we need infrastructure improvement. At the university, we're feeling the impacts of a tax shortfall. And so how do we manage and balance that and apply it appropriately so that the government is able to provide ag producers what they need in terms of the common good as well, without overburdening them on an individual
As a
basis.
producer,
having a complicated tax code. I mean, we have a complicated tax code because we have to take care of everybody. We have to take care of my neighbor where I grew up who had 2 cows and did nothing with them and probably never paid a tax dollar in his life, all the way up to corporate farms. I mean, if you're applying it to agriculture, you have to take care of agriculture, right? So that's why the system is complicated in general. So do you start out just addressing the question of, do you try to make a blanket tax policy for agriculture, or does it have to be somewhat inherently complicated?
As a producer, I think I'm going to have to partly disagree with something you said there. I think I would be speaking on behalf of most of us. We always want to try to pay a little tax, you know.
Yeah.
You can have a good tax man and avoid them year in, year out, but eventually that's going to catch up with you. Then you're going to pay a large bill. So we try to do our fair share, you know, and pay something just to keep from throwing those red flags. And you know, using the example of the man with the cows and not ever paying any taxes, I would say is incorrect there.
I'm not trying to vilify him.
We try
I
to
apologize for that.
We try to pay something every year, because if you don't, it's going to catch you in the long run, and then you're going to wind up with a huge bill instead of a small one.
No, I agree. And I do apologize. I wasn't trying to vilify anybody. I simply wanted to make a comparison between a very, very small holding producer. I mean, I imagine if a man owns some cows, he's going to fall under the agricultural producer blanket.
Well, let's expand that a little bit more, because one of the ways we can save money for producers but still have them pay their fair share is by kind of reforming this question around capital gains. What are we going to pay on investments that we make onto our farms? What are we going to pay on the part of the replacement heifer crop that we're going to keep for our brood stock? Because whenever they mature, if we count those as capital gains, we're going to be paying on them. So we can dial that back a little bit, create some avenues for itemized deductions on the farm, and then create this conversation around, you know, capital gains taxes not only kill us at the estate level, but also in that year-to-year kind of basis.
So Emma, I think that's interesting. One of the things that has intrigued me as I have learned more about tax policy is this ability to shift when those payments happen. So
That's exactly right.
Talk a little bit more about that and how that might be one of the adjustments that could be made to
Yeah.
further benefit farmers
So
and ranchers.
one of the things that you mentioned there is the timing of payments, and now timing is the salt of light. And one of the things that I appreciate American Farm Bureau for is their investment in teaching farmers how to balance their books with cash accounting. Now, the difference in cash accounting and accrual accounting is the timing of revenues and the timing of cash flows. So if I have an expense, if I can count it off of my books at the time that it occurs, that lowers my taxable income. And at the end of the year, I'll have that revenue. Now, there's a problem with that. If you have to prepay for a crop in the next season, you're going to run into some problems with the amount of cash at the end of the year after you've paid those expenses. But there's no perfect solution. And cash accounting seems to be the simplest. Here we are talking about complicated tax code. Can anything be simple? But here, a cash accounting system that Farm Bureau has the means and resources to teach producers to use could be the solution to timing those cash flows and accounting for expenses.
So does that also come back to Jesse's previous point about some way to manage savings and allow them to save without being taxed, so that we know that we have averaged income, right? And we can use that as one of the tools in our tool belt.
Right.
But if we can help them find a place to squirrel away some things while they're managing their time and their payments, that might be a helpful component to consider as well.
I think so.
Going back to the original question you asked in regards to the capital gain, that's another instance where we're given about 3 special provisions there, and we can use those to our advantage. You know, they're like-in-kind exchanges, land for land, equipment for equipment. What that allows you to do is kind of put off or defer that income and for the life of that item or that land until you reach retirement age and you dispose of it, or you use it all the way up, or you trade it off. So there's several things in there that benefit us as producers.
Strider, what's your opinion? You mentioned I think that the section that goes with that is 1031. Is that the in-kind, like-for-kind exchanges? So when you reach the end of your farming career, do you ultimately have that bill sitting there waiting because you
have that
assumedly
bill,
sell out?
But what you're allowed to do is say I want to sell my land or facilitate a takeover by either another individual outside my family or pass it on to a family member.
Right.
You're allowed to do that over multiple years where you're not receiving all that income at one time.
Okay.
So I could essentially owner finance my land and my equipment to the person coming in behind me, and we could spread that out as long as, I thought I might live, and how many years am I going to need income to live off of. So
Okay.
That's one way to get around that and beat that. And actually, it is good for you as the producer who is transitioning out, and it's great for the young guy who's trying to get his foot in the door, or young woman.
Okay, but
be
now
able to
does
make payments.
that money that's floating around out there, does that ever get paid? I mean, that the money that you're putting off by selling a tractor and buying a new tractor and not having to pay the overhead on that new tractor because you've replaced a piece of equipment, that money that's floating around, does it ever get settled if you work out of, however that winds up working, owner financing to somebody? If it's a son
That's
or-
where you go back to what Emma started with as far as depreciation. So there's a depreciation schedule, and once again, like I say, most of us love the current laws we've got. There's a couple, like the estate tax, that we would love to see gone permanently somehow. But on that depreciation schedule, anybody who is successfully operating large scale, not just part-time right now, is going to have a paid financial advisor, tax accountant, whatever you want to call them, and they're going to be advising you on how to handle that. Once, twice yearly, you're meeting with this person, you're taking a look at where you stand, either on a cash or accrual basis, however you choose. And so, the life of that equipment, that depreciation schedule is taking that value down, and essentially you're paying a little bit spread out instead of all at once. Now, one thing that can potentially get you is, say you come into farming, you buy a $300,000 combine, you have a terrible year and you want to get out and you have to sell that combine
Sure.
to try to settle some debts. You're going to get tore up, and there's just no way around it.
Right.
Absolutely. Go ahead, please.
Well, my question is for you and Strider, actually. When you talk about the estate tax and that being, seems to me at least one of the more burdensome components that we would appreciate getting rid of, what part of tax revenue does that account for? Do either of you know? If we were to do away with it,
Well, I would submit to you that it's probably relatively smaller than even last year, because in The last quarter, some interesting things have happened in the U.S. economy. The third quarter of the 2016 GDP grew by 3%, while our estate taxes and other reforms were cut. So now a small fraction of the population is actually going to pay that estate tax. An even smaller fraction of them would pay if we raised that glass ceiling from $5 million to $10 million. And I think it's a part of our job to do that so that we get a fair, equal, and balanced representation across the board. So if it's right for the $5 million category, let's make it right for the $10 million category and get the backing of American Farm Bureau to do so.
So what is that compromise, if you don't mind me asking, if you're moving from 5 to 10? If you're talking about making that change, where's the gain and where's the shortfall, and where do we have to compromise to make everybody all right with that?
Well, so just briefly to touch on that, it has to do with the value of your assets and how it's being passed through from generation to generation. It has to deal directly with those capital gains that we just finished a huge conversation with. And so I'd really like to get your thoughts, Jesse, actually on maybe a tax incentive structure for, or anyone, we'll open the discussion to the floor, but anyone that has thoughts on tax incentives for best practices. That's something that Farm Bureau has provided in the last quarter, or I should say the last annual year. So is there anything that we can come up with off the bat that we would be able to put in our portfolio of things to say, we want these kinds of incentives for doing X, Y, and Z that helps the society and helps our environment?
So I think for me, thinking about that from an outside perspective, I'm oftentimes concerned with what the public is going to be on board, since agriculturists make up the 2%, right? And so I think when we think about tax incentives and best practices that might be amenable or palatable to the public, they have to do with, they need to have to do with things that benefit the public common good.
All right, I
right? So
agree.
we talk about conservation and tax incentives for conservation.
Or
Those are
maybe
things
renewable
that
fuel.
benefit the public in general, and I think would gain support in terms of allowing some tax incentives for people that provide that.
Going
Yeah, I
back
think
to
that'd be
Jesse's
useful.
original question to Emma there, I guess in layman's terms, Jesse, to explain that to you, it would be that we as producers in agriculture are asset rich and cash poor. So if you could wrap your head around that, we're trying to transition all these assets, if we worked 30, 40, 50, 60 years, if you're fortunate enough to live that long, on to the next generation of our family or son-in-law or daughter-in-law or whoever we want to see continue our legacy. And so those provisions, and you were asking what the benefit was or the cost and the gain, and that's higher, raising that rate or that numeric amount.
Sure.
That's where the benefit is.
Sure. I wonder, when we're talking about how to best craft policy, or if we're going to talk about it just in the simplest terms, new tax codes, a new tax system, I feel like you're going to have a compromise somewhere. If we're going to raise this ceiling from $5 million to $10 million for capital gain, or estate tax, capital gains, estate tax, there are people that are not going to like that. I don't know what proportion of the general public out there land in that $5 million to $10 million range. If one of y'all do, I'd love to hear it, but they're not going to be happy. I mean, I know none of us do, so, well, I assume none of us do. I don't know, but they're not going to be happy one way or the other, so you're going to have some compromise. You've obviously just incentivized those people to not like your policy.
I think those people that wouldn't be in agreement with that would be the people that aren't involved in agriculture, because it really is a win-win for the agriculturalist. But to your point, if the consumer doesn't understand what we do and why we do, they can very easily take a stance that says, well, these farmers and ranchers, they're just trying to get a handout. They don't want to pay their fair share of taxes. Back to what Laura said, it's so important for that infrastructure. And we need that too. My Lord, how many combines have gone down Highway 55? Probably, to get from one plot to the next. And so we have to have those things because we utilize them too. But one of the things that Jesse actually brought up in your opening statement that I wanted to maybe see if we could address briefly is this idea of penalties. Can you express a little bit more on that?
Oh, no, all I meant to say was, I file my taxes every year, and they're complicated enough for me to handle, and when I make a mistake, I get penalized. And we just started this entire conversation with the idea that the tax code that we have right now is complicated.
Right.
And when you make a mistake in the complicated tax code, you pay a penalty.
That's right.
And just little old me and my little old paycheck, that penalty's not that bad, but I could imagine an agricultural producer of any scale or shape or size could get into big trouble real quick, making a mistake. Like Strider said, if you're a big enough producer, you're going to have a financial person on hand. If you don't have a financial person on hand, I would imagine you could get into trouble real quick.
Is that an area that Farm Bureau could play a role in
I
helping
honestly
protect
don't know.
their producers from
It
that
comes
shortfall?
back, in my mind, it comes back to the same old cliche that you're going to educate the farmers. You know, like farmers are smart enough.
Right.
You can bang your head against the wall using that old line, we got to educate the farmer. They obviously know what's going on. I mean, if they make a mistake, I guess they're in the same boat as me. You just made a mistake. You know, you won't make it again.
I guess
Farm,
I may be getting repetitive, but like I say, we as producers are satisfied with most of what we have, and we would like to see it stay. The tax code, yes, it's a 2,000-page manual, and am I going to sit down and read it? No, but the
No.
man who works for me has, and
Sure.
he's going to take care of me. So I'm gonna spend a little money to save a lot, and I would say that I would be more of the opinion of, yes, there's some things that we can change and we would like to see repealed, but as far as a mass overhaul, no. I know that the president-elect has actually talked about a repeal of the entire estate tax, and presumably that would be for everyone. Does a billionaire need it? I mean, no, but is it going to be beneficial to me and what I do, which I'm gearing this question towards ag tax policy,
Sure.
Not the entire tax code.
Agreed.
So I'd like to take all of these things that we've put together and kind of see where we're standing on a global economic model. So we know that agriculture is the number one exporter that America is the number one exporter of agricultural goods in the world. And our country's gross domestic product, which is that value of all products and services that Americans can create, is sitting at $985 billion. We saw, as I mentioned earlier, a 3% increase in that in the third quarter. And to find that value, the very first variable is a consumption function, which is the household's ability to purchase. It's their marginal propensity to consume. And it's a function of their income minus taxes. So wouldn't it be in the best interest of our nation if even by a margin we could bring those tax rates down? Not only would it help our consumption, but it would surely stimulate the economy going forward as well.
I mean, I don't like paying taxes any more than anybody else does, but do we have a case for when we look from an agricultural perspective, we can say, on a general idea, we're pretty satisfied with what we've got going on, with maybe a couple of exceptions. Can the individual make that same argument and say, do I wish I was in a lower tax bracket? Do I wish I paid less of a percentage? Yeah. Am I willing to like it or lump it, given the services that I want provided from my government? I don't know.
I would
think
say that we as producers would be way more satisfied with the 90% of us that are currently probably in that 15% tax bracket, which meaning we will never pay over 15% of that income level, than to see some sort of consumptive tax that Emma just mentioned. That would be a nightmare.
Well, no, I'm not saying that has to be a function of our own taxes that we pay out of our own checkbooks. That's just the greater good of the country. I'm just like you. My taxes get deducted from my paycheck from the dairy, and I make so little as a part-time student worker. I get most of it back. But here's the thing. If there's even a
talk to your
chance... Okay. If there's a chance that we could even lower that just a little bit, like you've both said, I think we can be all in agreement that, do we wish that we were just 1% taxed less? 1%, yes, because the only other way to generate that type of stimulus is government spending, and we all know how that goes, especially if the media gets a hold of it. But if we can just lower it by 1%, then wouldn't it be worth our efforts as young farmers and ranchers? I know I'm planning for my own future, and I know one day I'll receive a modest farm, modest Angus ranch in Northeast Arkansas, and I hope that I don't have to pay the taxes on that. But isn't it worth our efforts now to lay the foundation, establish ourselves as the authority on agriculture tax reform now before it becomes more of a challenge in the future? I guess maybe prepare for the worst, pray for the best, and then let the rest of it work itself out.
It almost sounds like reform isn't all that necessary. I'll be honest as well. I'm not a producer. I'm not going to inherit a farm. Strider, speak to that if you don't mind.
I
if you're,
kind of bungled my opening statement. I'll be the first to admit that. Didn't finish it well, but that was something I was addressing. Kind of my opening line was, give me the rules and I'll play the game. And then
Sure.
the second line was, what did I say there? I said, you get me again, but anyway. I said that what we have
Yeah.
is probably better than what we're going to get, in other words.
and in your opinion, is that overwhelming population of Mississippi farmers feel that way?
I would say that out of the half dozen I interviewed in the past
Sure.
10 days, that they all felt that way.
Really?
And they fear, a consumptive tax of some sort would just be detrimental to our industry.
So
Yeah.
one of the other things that has struck me as I've tried to learn more about this is that it seems very tenuous, and it seems that tax policy has the ability to fluctuate more so than maybe some of the other policies that we experience in agriculture. And so, again, from a producer perspective, is it really more of a battle for us in making sure that what's working for us right now becomes more permanent? We got rid of the estate tax for a year in 2010, right? It was non-existent, and then all of a sudden it came back. We're pretty happy with what we've got going on. How do we make some of those things more permanent, or at least have more faith that they are here to stay?
Or
One
how
of
do
the
we
things
take
that
care
we
of our
know is that
neighbor?
it's so variable, and that's what we're trying to do with our tax policy, is eliminate or at least address some of that risk. And so how do we go about that?
I think, again, you have to consider the united voice of the American Farm Bureau. So the Mississippi Farm Bureau, we've clearly got it figured out down here. Everyone is happy with our taxes as they currently stand, but here's the thing. We have other neighbors that we take part in interstate commerce with that don't have the same taxes as us. So just a neighbor to the north, Tennessee doesn't have an income tax, and so their tax structure looks different than ours. It has a greater sales tax, and so what does that look like if we're purchasing something from our neighbor? So while, yes, we have Mississippi, we're thankful for the provisions that our legislature has provided and that the national government has instituted for this state. Agriculture is more than just the Magnolia State. Now, I would submit to you Magnolia State may be the most important in the union, but we have to consider those other states that may not have it the same way our producers do, and certainly may not have the budget at the end of the year to pay their taxes, maybe even if they're modest, because of things like this year, like we had the drought.
I guess going back to what Jesse asked me and then building on what you said, kind of the answer lies within the question. Yes, it's complicated, and yes, there are all these special allowances and special rules, but it is a vast economic system in this country, and we all have different types of jobs, and so it has to be complicated. It's constantly changing. New things are being added, old things are being taken out. So I just really don't know how you would ever simplify that other than just to keep changing, keep adapting. Farm Bureau needs to keep putting in that sound policy on what our stance is so our voice can be heard. And after all, we're here for the farmer and the producer, and that's my main concern, is protecting that opinion. And I really, although I value the other ones, my stance is I'm taking a hard line and I'm protecting what my values are, what my legacy is, what I stand for, what I plan to continue doing and, to survive.
Sure.
So we've talked about tax code, we've talked about estate tax, timing of payments, in-kind payments, cash accounting, and we've pretty much summed up that maybe we're not going to change anything. maybe it's just going to stay the way it is, and it's going to be complicated forever. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I think you hit on something really important, though, and that's our ability to adapt and change and make sure that we are proactive and that we continue to be the voice. So many times we hear that ag is reactive. We wait for something that isn't good for us to then decide that we need to speak up. And so I agree with Emma. I think we have a strong voice in American Farm Bureau. I agree with you, Strider, that we've got something that works for us right now. And so maybe it's a combination of those things, making sure that we're monitoring what's coming next and what those outside forces are going to be in terms of managing what that policy looks like moving forward to continue to reduce at least the risk of being in agriculture.
I think that's huge. Risk is everything, especially whenever our paycheck is so dependent on fluctuating currencies and market prices. It's all about protecting the producer.
We've reached the end of our 30-minute discussion. We ask now that our audience please give 1 minute of quiet time for our contestants to prepare their closing statements. Contestants, in voluntary order, please give your 1 minute closing statement.
I would ask that we as Farm Bureau protect the tax codes that we currently have that most farmers seem to be in consensus on that they love and don't want to lose. That would be the Section 179, the 50% bonus depreciation, and we would like to see a repeal of the estate tax, at least in our segment of agriculture, to make transition to the next generation easier. There may be some rules we need to amend and some that we need to make permanent, such as that 179. Even though Congress did vote back in 15 to kind of make it permanent, we need something with some backbone in it where it can't just be voted on and taken out again.
It's said that two things are certain in life, death and taxes. It's also said that the devil is in the details, and so it seems that maybe the details of our tax code aren't quite so certain. And maybe that's something that we need to focus on. I really appreciate the enlightening conversation that we had today. I certainly learned a lot from all my peers up here. And I think walking away, some things are clear. I think that we have a voice in agriculture through our Farm Bureau Federation. I think that we need to focus on what things maybe do need to be fixed. And I think that it's certainly prudent for us to be proactive in managing the changes that come into our tax code as we move forward to reduce that risk.
Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you as a hopeful future producer of agriculture, but will I be allowed to do that? The only limiting factor is if I can afford it. Now, we know that tax codes change with every administration, so the luxuries that we experience right now may last for 4 years, may last for 8 years, but there's no certainty in the future. So if we can capture the audience and create a conversation and command that conversation around things like averaging incomes and having tax deductions for things that we're doing right by society, then we can protect the future generation of agriculturalists and provide for the means that they'll use to grow tomorrow's food.
So we discussed about every pertinent thing we could think of that had to do with the U.S. tax code, at least as far as it refers to agriculture. And I think when it comes down to it, we all want the same thing. We all want fairness in costs, and we all want hope for the future. And as long as we have those things, maybe the devil in the details is less important to the average producer. If anything, I think we've shed light on maybe just how complicated some small segment of the tax code is. I thank you guys for the conversation. Like Laura said, it was incredibly enlightening for just a dude that plays in the dirt all day. So I appreciate it. Thank you all.
We got a free suntan.
Yeah, right.
Participants, we thank each of you for your participation and for productive and friendly competition. Serving as judges for this round were Ms. Natalie Roy, Executive Director of the AgriSafe Network, Mr. Brian Bro, Associate Commodity Director with the Louisiana Farm Bureau, and Mr. Jeffrey Hall, Rangeland Insurance Agent with Sylvius Insurance Group. Judges, we thank you for taking the time this afternoon to judge our competition. You may now exit the room to tabulate your scores. Contestants, if you will, again in voluntary order, please take a minute to tell the audience a little about yourselves.
I guess it's my turn to go first. I'm Dr. Laura Greenhaw. I'm an assistant professor at Mississippi State University in the School of Human Sciences. I teach agricultural leadership there, enjoy it very much. I have a 30% extension appointment, and so I enjoy doing those programs as well. I am originally a New Mexico native. I spent most of my adulthood in Texas before I moved here to accept the job at Mississippi State in 2013. But I married a good Mississippi boy, so I guess that gives me a little bit of weight. Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversations that I've had this morning. I really appreciated getting to know my peers in this competition, and so thank you to Farm Bureau for hosting this.
All right, ladies first. My name is Emma Jumper. I'm a native of Arkansas, but I'd like to think that I have been accepted as an honorary Mississippian. I've spent 4 years at the Mississippi State University. I'm a student talking up here and having an interesting conversation with my professors. And so I'm really thankful for the opportunity that Farm Bureau provides to bridge the gap between generations so that we can all come together to find these kinds of solutions. I study corporate finance and economics. I also am a milkmaid at the dairy. I'm so proud of that. So I hope you enjoy the ice cream. We work really hard for that. I also am planning to go and pursue a master's degree next fall in economics before, Lord willing, going on to law school to study intellectual property and hopefully one day returning back to a position where I can serve agriculture with my talent.
My name is Jesse Morrison. I'm a research associate at Mississippi State University. I work in forage agronomy. I've been at Mississippi State since 2010. I'm originally from North Carolina. I didn't grow up on a farm. I grew up playing around in the woods, and I told my dad I wanted a job when I was about 12, and he sent me to his friend's dairy to pick up rocks. And yeah, and then I went to college and decided I wanted to keep doing it. But anyway, yeah, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank all y'all for being here and having us. Thank you very much. Thank you guys for the good time today. I appreciate it. Thank you, Farm Bureau.
I'm Strider McCrory. I'm from Sunflower County, Mississippi, where I produce row crops. I'm also in a partnership in Holmes County, Mississippi with my father, where we have a small cow-calf operation, about 80 head of mama cows, and a hay operation. I'm married to the former Jane Allen McGregor of Indianola. Used to moved there with the Extension Service, and met and married her. And in 2013, agriculture was as good as it ever been, is what they were telling me, so I figured I would step out and try just that. And so far, the Lord has blessed me. We've made a pretty good crop most years and been in the black, not in the red. And we've got two wonderful sons, one's 7 and one's 2. And just blessed to be here, glad to be here, glad to be part of this organization. And there's a couple of old professors out there in the audience and one ex-boss, and I just wanted to thank that ex-boss. I'm not going to say his name because I don't want to get him in trouble, but he allowed me to grow in my agricultural career while working for the Extension Service and did not see that as a conflict of interest, so I just wanted to say thank you since you're out there.
Contestants, you may now return to the audience. The winner of this competition will be announced during the Young Farmer and Rancher Awards ceremony on Sunday evening during the 5:30 p.m. general session. The contest winner will receive a four-wheeler, compliments of Southern Farm Bureau Life Insurance Company, $850, compliments of Southern Ag Credit, $500, compliments of Watson Quality Ford, and an expense-paid trip to compete in the National Young Farmers and Ranchers Discussion Meet during the American Farm Bureau Federation Annual Convention in Phoenix, Arizona during January 2017. Thank you all for being such an attentive audience, and best of luck to each of our competitors. Good evening. As David said, my name is Tedrick Ratcliffe, the state winner of last year's discussion meet. It's an honor for me to join you this evening and announce the winner of this year's meet. As you all know, Farm Bureau's strength depends on its members' ability to analyze agriculture problems and decide on a solution that best meets their needs. The discussion meet is designed to simulate a committee meeting where discussion and active participation are expected by each member of the committee. By participating, contestants build basic discussion skills, develop a keen understanding of important ag issues, and explore how groups can pool knowledge and reach a consensus, solve problems together. On Saturday, we held our competition with 8 contestants competing from all over the state. 4 of these contestants made it through the first 2 preliminary rounds of competition to advance to the final round. Those contestants were, from Region 4, Jesse Morrison. From Region 4, Emma Jumper. Also from Region 4, Laura Greenhall. From Region 1, Strider McCrory. The topic of discussion for our final round of competition was, the nation's tax policy has become increasingly complicated and cumbersome. What should a balanced and beneficial tax policy look like for agriculture? I don't know about y'all, but that's a difficult question to discuss. Please help me give all of our top 4 finalists a round of applause for an engaging discussion and outstanding competition. The winner of the discussion meet will receive a four-wheeler, compliments of Southern Farm Bureau Life Insurance Company, $850, compliments of Southern Ag Credit, $500, compliments of Watson Quality Ford, and an expense-paid trip to compete in the National Young Farmer Ranchers Discussion Meet that will be held at the American Farm Bureau Federation's annual meeting in Phoenix, Arizona next month. So now for the moment that all of the young folks on the front row have waited for, our 2016 discussion meet winner is Mr. Strider McCrory from Region 1. Strider, please join me to accept your awards and say a few words.
Is this a look of shock and awe? I don't, blind squirrel, the acorn, the whole deal. Just want to thank Farm Bureau as an organization and the Young Farmers and Ranchers Committee and the vision that Farm Bureau had all those years ago when they started that program and allowing me to participate in it. And want to thank the state committee, Young Farmers and Ranchers. Y'all put on an excellent event for us, and the ladies have been lovely hosts, and y'all have run everything real well. This is quite unexpected, so I was up against some PhDs and some people who I thought maybe were better speakers than I were, but I guess I'm just surprised and thankful, and okay, well, thank y'all, and thank you to all the sponsors, and great prizes, and looking forward to that. So just thank you.